right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Training, Learning, and Development community. Happy New Year to you all. We've got our first member showcase for 2022 with our guest, Ian Crook, who I have actually had a lot of fun chatting with. We've already talked once before this, and I even did some interwebs research on him, managed to find an old podcast that he used to do. And
embarrassingly.
Yeah, you got to be careful about that stuff.
Yeah.
I know. I often actually, check for myself, like some of the stuff that I've found. It's kind of amazing that things like, from early 2000s, from being in like Hewlett Packard message boards and stuff, that like, I'm asking server questions. I'm like, that is still like archived.
My
online.
live journal still live.
Exactly. Well, so I've got like about a dozen questions for you. We got 30 minutes. And yeah, let's see, Laura, can everyone hear the audio just fine? I can hear Ian just fine. So, and Lauren, you probably can't hear us, but let's see, maybe if somebody else can type in there, we want to make sure that you're able to hear our audio. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see who we've got in. We've got Ann Spalding is here. Lauren is here. Hopefully she'll be able to hear us. Let's see, Elizabeth, Jennifer, Heather, thanks for joining us today. And we'll get started with some of these questions. Now, just a reminder for some of those that are new, and we've had a lot of new subscribers, new members to TLDC just in the last couple of weeks. It's actually been kind of incredible, the amount of new memberships we've been getting lately. But what we do is we do these member showcases for members that come in, and it's just a chance for us to explore who these people in this learning and development world are. And we've done, I think we did about 60 last year, and hopefully we'll do at least that amount again this year. And it is a great resource if you're wondering about instructional design, learning experience design, and whether or not it's the career for you, or you just want to network and meet people. This is a great way to do it. And so we're going to start with Ian this year, who I think is a great person to meet. I'm already happy to have met him. And Ian is a tech instructional designer over at Amazon Web Services, AWS. And my first question to you, Ian, is what is a tech instructional designer?
Sure. So basically, from what I've seen, a technical instructional designer, and I know our field is full of titles that mean the same thing and sometimes don't. A technical is just someone that focuses and has a little bit of background with the technologies that they're kind of designing for. My entire background leading up to instructional design has been IT. Like I was, break fix for a while. I was, a sysadmin for a hot minute there. I'd been in the data centers doing a myriad of roles, just doing strictly IT, a little bit of process improvement, and stuff like that. And then, the accidental trainer starts coming in, and, they realize that like I understood the business process improvement side of things. And then I got super passionate about the behavioral change management side of things, which goes into training. And that's kind of what it is. And just an instructional designer that understands and knows the technology probably a little bit more intimately than just a typical.
Right. So you're kind of a subject matter expert, like a hybrid and instructional designer.
A little bit. At a minimum, it's I'm the engineers are my people, so to speak. So at the worst case scenario, I know how to talk the talk and like speak at that technical level and understand where they're going with concepts. But on the other side, I may just know what's going on.
Okay, cool. So, and just so folks know, like I have an IT background too, so hopefully this doesn't get too geeky, but I am curious, like, is your did you specialize in like cloud technologies before, and that's how you got into AWS, or how did that happen? Or you started working at AWS and then you learned, the technology?
Sure. So actually, most of my career has been break fix, whether it be, like one of my first break fix jobs was like a Geek Squad. I think that's the adage for like every single person in IT, is they've worked at Geek Squad at some point of their life. And I went from there and worked at a couple managed service providers, doing a little bit more. And then before I joined Amazon, I was working at a managed service provider that was more focused on the network aspect. So,
Mhm.
when you're on like an Amtrak train or in some other circumstances, some buses where they provide internet, like I help do break fix and remote management of those devices. And then getting into Amazon, it was within the data centers. So it's like I was still kind of doing, in this case, it was decommissioning and like rack install and a whole bunch of other stuff. But it was still kind of getting your hands dirty with the equipment. So it's like, yes, I was dealing with the cloud, but I was physically still doing fundamentally the same things.
Yeah.
And then, from there, it's just, you're kind of in the ecosystem and you're learning a lot about AWS services and the technologies used. And, being a ruthless self-improver, I get fascinated by a ton of things. So, understanding how AWS works, the cloud in general, and being able to utilize something like that. Also, I'm passionate about because it's techie, but now I get to utilize that knowledge and talk with other people that know way more than me, and hopefully create environments where people can learn.
Wow, that's really interesting. So now let's talk about how did you get into L&D? Like, how did that happen? Because I guess learning about AWS
Mhm.
and even IT all around, that's kind of just a different animal, right? And
Yeah.
probably a pretty lucrative one if you're in the right position. But here you are, you're an instructional designer. How did that happen?
Sure. So, I, as I said, I was always been kind of in IT, but like the other nerd subject that I was into was like business process improvement and change management. So, Lean, Six Sigma, value stream mapping, Kaizens, all that stuff. And I got really into that because processes and procedures and making things more efficient is just something that I just find fascinating. And what at the end of all change management and processes is, you get this split. It's either a systems change where you're developing new tooling, new software, et cetera, to create those efficiencies, or and you're having to take a look at like behavioral change. And I got I got obsessed with the behavioral change side of things. And I had a mentor that that was part of kind of like a change management process improvement team, and he had just started up a training team, and I got put on that team. And then that's kind of where it all started, and I just started continuously hunkering down and learning, and just constantly learning. I'm endlessly fascinated by the science of how people learn and how it can apply to corporate environments. Like, I, it's just super fascinating.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's okay. So where did the whole instructional design thing make it experience?
Oh, sure. So, when I kind of jumped into the process improvement team, that was actually like they said like, okay, so you're going to become a trainer, or like training. You're going to go into training, and it's like, okay, I know a lot of stuff in theory, but I haven't like professionally applied a lot of this stuff. And they're like, you'll be fine. You'll also do supply chain. And it's like, okay, haven't done that either. Neat. Okay, let's go with this. And they're like, you'll do fine. And honestly, that like baptism by fire, where I like, it was like, oh, you've got an interest in this? Cool. Throw you into the deep end.
Yeah.
um, is what got me into, at least the production aspect of it. I started really focusing in on like Captivate when it was kind of the industry leader at the time. Articulate 2 was out during that time. Just making videos and making like engaging content. And then it was like, okay, I know how to produce things because, IT, you kind of get used to software in general. And then I started going, it's like, I want to make sure what I'm creating is actually having an impact. And that was just the slow transformative direction from like being IT, dealing with software, and now I'm producing, and now I'm like really getting into the nitty gritty of, like CogSci and like why and how people learn and what creates engagement.
Really interesting. So how much formal training in instructional design have you had?
It's mainly through ATD. So I do have both the instructional design and the e-learning instructional design basic certs, but I also do have the master instructional design cert there, and I'm studying. I'm studying for some other certs as well, CPTD. But I don't have any necessarily like academic training. A lot of it is just, when I don't know something, I either seek out that knowledge or I find people that have that knowledge too. And I just, I pretty much go to them and be like, I love everything you're doing. Please tell me. Please teach me things.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And so, wow. So this passion for L&D, for being an instructional designer, what was it really that kind of like drove you above sort of like what you loved about IT? There must have been something that said, I'm going to choose this over this, or was there anything like that?
I think the click in my head was I think I said this before. I'm a ruthless self-improver. I really, really love learning to the point where, there are some instances where I'll get anxiety where it's like my head says, I need to learn this. And it's like, if I don't, my head starts saying, well, you should learn this now. By the way, if you ever want to learn how to get your pilot's license and what plane you should get, even though I'm not getting that in a decade, I know that too because my brain said I had to learn it, so I learned it. So I would say probably the biggest thing that clicked was my love for learning just in general, but also IT is very programmatic in a lot of ways. Like there's the correct way of doing things, and then there's the broken way of doing things. And having that thought into process improvement and building businesses and all this other stuff, like if I can do that for learning and saying like what is I don't want to say the correct way because that is such a nebulous term. If there is a most efficient way for learning for any particular environment, it was like scratching all of those itches. I was learning new things. I was creating, helping create improvement. I was seeing change happen right in front of me, and I kept I kept chasing that dragon, so to speak. And it's just like, I just constantly want to do that for people, just in general.
I have never heard that term associated with L&D, so that's definitely a first. That's great. How about some things that you wish you had known when you had first started out, like when you had just gotten into it? How long have you been, a practicing instructional designer?
I want to say probably a total of like 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Yeah, probably a total of 5 or 6 years. There was a stint where I had to kind of step away from the training team, and then I went back into it. Some career hodgepodge sort of stuff happened during that time, but it was always one of those things that's like, okay, I'm forking off of this for now, but it's like that's when I started getting the certifications, and it's like I'm going to move back onto that path, just in general. The thing that I probably would want to learn now, much to the chagrin of many instructional designers, is probably be a little bit more astute in JavaScript. I really like, in terms of collecting data, also creating, engaging online material and like all this other stuff, like knowing intermediate level JavaScript versus knowing basic JavaScript is like light years of capability that you can get from any of the materials you create.
Right.
Yeah, so probably JavaScript at this stage.
That's one of those things that it's been on my list for a really,
Right.
really long time. It's like, why can I never get to that? I really want to learn JavaScript. I mean,
Right.
just
It's
as
so
practice,
painful though.
yeah. Just as technology professionals, it's almost
Right.
like something you need to know,
Right.
right? Because there's always like, okay, I got to hand this over to this guy because he knows JavaScript, rather than being able to do it yourself. You'd rather do it yourself, but like for me anyway, I would
Right.
rather keep it in-house for me rather than having to hand it over to somebody else. But yeah,
Right.
no, that's a
Yeah.
good one. That's a good one. Excellent. All right, let me
Yeah.
see what other questions I got on here. So, oh yeah, typical day as a technology instructional designer. I don't get to talk to many of your types. So what's it like?
A lot of it is pretty typical instructional design, where it's just you're just trying to figure out like where the learning gaps are and where the needs are, and but where it stops and starts changing is, obviously when they start saying like, oh, we need a little bit more knowledge on, XYZ particular service. So for instance, like if somebody wanted to learn more about EC2, it's like, okay, well, that's broad. What specifically are we talking about EC2? Are we talking about? It's like, oh, well, utilizing Lambda scripts with EC2 instances to help turn them on and off, like that type of stuff. And it's like, okay. And you're able to kind of speak at that same level. So a good chunk of it is just like understanding what services are available, understanding what your customer wants, but also understanding the technology so that so you're not flying blind into every conversation with a SME, and anybody else. So like that's probably the biggest difference between there, is like you're speaking the language of the engineer
Right.
in a lot of instances.
So is there a lot of sort of professional development going on? What on the job, you just learning the terminology, learning, making sure that you have your head wrapped around, the variety of AWS sort of products and services so you can support accordingly. Is that just a big part of your everyday, function?
There is definitely like that professional development aspect of it. But it's kind of like what I said before. It's like I see something, and like if I get assigned to projects, it's like you kind of have to start deep diving it. There are a lot of very specific things that you could lose the trust of your SMEs very quickly if you're coming in being like, how do you make the computers beep and boop? And they're just like, okay, I can't talk to you because everything I'm going to say is going to go over your head. And it just becomes much more difficult. So like, when a project comes your way, you may not know what those services are specifically when the project kind of lands in your lap, but then that's up to you to also like read the documentation, kind of go through that type of stuff, and having an IT background kind of makes that process a whole lot quicker.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Elizabeth has a nice comment about JavaScript on here, and I think Lauren posted something in the QA as well. So let me just actually start out with this. Is the expectation is, for your job, is that you have like a good handle on producing like e-learning, using Captivate and using Articulate products to be able to create content?
Sure. Not in my current role.
Uh-huh.
Generally speaking, however, like in my previous role, it was a lot of creating content and managing content through things like articulate rise and a little bit of storyline,
Hmm.
and even kind of diving a little into like CSS and kind of hacking things through there. So
Hmm.
I would say like where I'm at currently is typically not the norm. We've actually kind of split the instructional design aspect and the development into two separate teams, so that my focus is definitely more on really making sure and understanding what the learning gap is and designing the story, the storyboard, and like how we're going to get there, to the
Hmm.
other side of that learning gap. And then you pretty much take that work order and work with a curriculum developer, and they put they rubber on the road type stuff.
Right, right. No, it feels like most, especially larger enterprise orgs, like I think smartly strategize to, to
Right.
compartmentalize things just to,
Right.
just to scale better. But just sort of associated with that, Lauren's question is, and she's just curious, which L&D systems tie into JavaScript? Just wondering what that is optimizing. Just wondering what that is optimizing for course development. Any
Sure.
ideas?
Yes. Pretty much anything that goes on the web has JavaScript attached to it. So I don't want to say like the world's your oyster with JavaScript if you're doing any sort of e-learning or any sort of web-based anythings. But for instance, Articulate Storyline 360, you're able to add specialty triggers that just run JavaScript code. So you can do a lot more complex things with your storyline module. For instance, I was doing a bunch of randomized dice rolls on some certain things. I never finished this, but like I was having a problem with it because I was just using a million triggers, which is something that happens when you're dealing with storyline. And it just ended up that it's just like it's a lot easier to call a JavaScript function that just inputs the variables you need into, or inputs the data you need into variables, just right then and there, instead of like trying to code with the triggers. Instead, you could just have a block, and then it's much more organized, much more clean, and much more functional. um Another thing too that I would probably say, that JavaScript is a really important thing. I think the majority of us have heard XAPI and the ability to collect way more discrete behavioral data. Just in general, like JavaScript is a fundamental of how those agent statements work. Um, it's not a requirement, but that's what everything's kind of built around, is JavaScript. You can write them in Python and whatever language, as long as it can talk online and puke the correct statement out. But fundamentally, though, it's that's a big aspect of collecting. Excuse me, collecting larger sets of data in XAPI. So I know that's kind of like a wide breadth answer to like learning JavaScript, but it's like it's one of those things that like if you don't know it, that's fine. The tools that are out there are really good, and you can get by utilizing them. But once you start learning how you can create your own tooling to get it specifically where you want it to go, to grab specific sets of data, to collect specific types of data, like all about that extra polish,
Mhm.
JavaScript will absolutely get you there.
Right, right. I think that especially if you have any kind of e-learning focus,
Hmm.
it's a really powerful tool to have in your toolbox.
Yes.
And it's just one of those things where I know that pretty much in most technical sort of situations I've been in, anybody that has JavaScript attached to them, like they have that skill, they're put into a separate pile of like, yeah, yeah, let's consider this person. And it's not like, like I want to point out Elizabeth's comment where she's talking about how let's see, what she say here. She started out as an artist, then graphic designer, now an instructional systems designer. She took an intro to JavaScript mini course, much harder than anticipated, right? But it's not impossible, right? It's just one
Right.
of those things. You just got to stick with it and learn
Right.
it. And for me, I know it's just I have to set aside a certain amount of time, and you need the projects to work on it, right? So,
Yep.
like Torrance Learning has some, the wonderful cohorts that they do, where that might be a great way to, to get into it and just kind of force yourself to focus on learning JavaScript. But it's not impossible. You can definitely do it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's programming, and I don't know if it's because of the severity of ADHD. Like it is an uphill battle. I feel like I forget what mythology is. The guy just pushing the stone up the mountain constantly, and it's just like it's just such a difficult path. But I know that even understanding and being able to implement minute aspects of JavaScript open up massive doors that most folks don't realize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's like learning algebra. I know
Yeah.
that for me, when I had that algebra breakthrough, whenever I was 12 or 13, I'm like, oh wow, I get it. And that's how it felt like when I was in IT and I was taking programming classes. I'd be like, oh, what is this? C++? I cannot. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, got it. And then all of a sudden 6 hours would go like just like that. Just me sitting there like programming and compiling stuff. But
Right.
that's a whole other story. But you just got to stick with it. All right. So how about just give us some examples of maybe, do you have a training project that you particularly are fond of that you'd like to kind of brag about?
Sure. I don't know if I can talk about much because a lot of the stuff I did, at least at Amazon, is under NDA. So I can't necessarily talk about that, but I will say I do have a project and I will share this link.
Right.
Yeah, right. It is just a Rise module, but the story behind the Rise module is hilarious. So this isn't, like I said, this isn't something like recent. I made this a couple years ago. The context is my wife got stuck at her mother's house like 300 miles away, and I was where I am now, and just the car broke down. She called me up, and I'm mechanically inclined also. I think that happens with a lot of IT people. You just learn how to diagnose everything. And I knew what the problem was. And I was just like, all right, it's an easy fix for me. I know how to walk someone through it. And I really don't want to pay for a tow truck, and I don't want to pay for a mechanic out of state. Like, I really don't want to do that. So I asked her, would you be okay if I made you an e-learning on how to fix the car?
I love it. Love it.
And it's, I whipped this up in like 3 hours. So it's not polished by like any stretch of the imagination. But like, and I also, it was a blended learning, moment. Like I was on the phone. It was VILT also. So I created a training for my wife to change the ignition coils on her 2012 Beetle.
Wow.
And she did it. She got home. Like,
yeah.
What better way to say the training worked than to be like, that's the perfect evaluation.
I love
there.
it.
Boom.
Is this something that I could actually link out? Can people
Yeah. I mean, I personally don't mind. I mean, it's an Articulate Rise review link. I don't know how permanent those are. I've been meaning to try to put it on like an S3 bucket or something, but that's it takes time, and I've got to do a million things. So
that is great. No, thanks for sharing that. I would click on it, but then I'd be afraid I'd get taken away to somewhere that where I couldn't get back. So I'm gonna have to look at that right after we wrap up here. I don't have that much time, but I do want to know a few more things. Like, how do you stay on top of your professional development?
A lot of it is just putting myself into circumstances that I know I don't know what I'm doing in some instances. So and just like stretching, not being dangerous about it or being, increasing liability, but just knowing that it's like, oh, hey, I actually don't know, this particular service. Sure, I'll take it. I know I have the capability of learning quick. I know I have the capability of, applying instructional material. all right, let's figure this out. And just taking those chances and constantly looking at like, how can you stretch yourself just a little bit day by day.
Right.
And
Right.
just being, and just make that part of like how you make decisions. Like, I don't want
Yeah.
to say like, look at it from how can I make my life just a little bit harder? Like, don't think of it like that, but just more or less like, how can I make this so that I grow or I move the needle just a little bit, every day.
Yeah, no, you're definitely, I mean, it's obvious that you're a learner, and I totally admire that about people. And you seem more like a CTO type to me. So it's pretty,
I wouldn't
I'm
go
pretty
that
impressed. All right. So, and what other kinds of jobs have you worked prior to even being at AWS? Has it been IT forever, or ever deliver pizza or anything?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Technically, I worked at a pizza joint for a day. And I worked at a McDonald's until I had a nervous breakdown because I require like some creative control, and it's impressive, but also I can't deal with it. They have everything figured out at McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everything is figured out. No, but my first job that I had was actually at a vinyl sign shop. It's where I learned a lot of my business acumen.
Mm-hmm.
It was a small shop, and I learned a bit of graphics design and learned how to produce posters and signage and all this
Mm-hmm.
other type of stuff. And the owner, he was my mentor for the longest time, and he helped me like really kind of figure that entrepreneurial spirit and that and just like that part of me, and I grew that until, as I said before, the instructional bug hit me, and then it's just like, I want to do this now.
Yeah, yeah.
you know
No, I love those kind of jobs. All right, last question. And so if
Sure.
you weren't an L&D professional, what do you think you'd be?
If I wasn't L&D professional, what I think it'd be, I think it would be really fascinating. So I'm learning the bagpipes too. So if I could become a professional bagpiper, that'd be hilariously awesome. Because of course I am.
I love it. I love it. Do you have like what do you do to I mean, do you have like a select sort of playlist of bagpipes that you listen to, or what inspires you in the bagpipe world?
Sure. So I am my great grandfather was Scottish. My dad and my grandfather were British, and just like it was just kind of like a fascinating instrument anyway. I'm also loud and boisterous, and you can't find an instrument that doesn't equate to that more than the bagpipes. Just in general, actually, fun fact, like if you're playing indoors, like I have to wear earplugs because it can get upwards to like 110 decibels with the reverb. It is a loud instrument. Neighbors love me. And yeah, just like a little bit of the heritage, but also just like the folk aspect of it. I don't know.
Mhm.
It's just like one of those things. It just seems fun.
Yeah.
And I wanted more musical creative outlets, and this one stuck.
I love it. How long you been doing it?
About a year and a half, 2 years
Okay.
now. I can play some stuff. I actually just got pushed up to a more difficult reed, and I've been having sinus issues all day. So
Mhm.
like usually my lips blow out before my lungs do, but my lungs are just like, I don't even know why you're doing this right now. Here, I'm just gonna stop. And then I'm just like, okay, I need to catch my breath. Because it's such a difficult instrument. It is the most physical instrument I've ever played. Ever
Right.
played. It's
Yeah.
so difficult.
That's great. That's great. That's awesome. Ian, thanks so much for spending some time with us. I'm so glad I got to meet you. Let's see. I don't have your LinkedIn profile in front of me. I'm going to paste it in after we're done here. So, if
I think it literally is just I'm Ian Crook.
Okay.
That's kind of the brand I've been trying to push. It's just I'm Ian Crook. I don't know. Like
yeah. I found your website too, but yeah, there's
that might be locked down. I'm trying to figure out what I want it to look like. It might be. If it's not, I probably should.
It's locked down. It's locked down. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Ian. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks again for joining us today. And don't forget, sign up at the end of this month. We've got that teacher to instructional design event that is happening. Very popular. I've got like close to 300 people already signed up for that one. It's not till the 21st. Yeah.
That's
and then
pretty good.
there is a writing for instructional design event coming up at the end of the year. Who we have on that one? Christy Tucker, Jen Yaros, Kim Lindsay. I still am waiting on a couple more people. So that should be a great event too. And with that, we're going to sign off. Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Ian. I'm going to contact you again. Maybe we'll do another broadcast soon.
Yeah, definitely. Take it easy.
All right. See you, everybody.